Hello and welcome to the Let's Talk Azure podcast with your host Sam Foote.
And Armstrong.
If you're new here, we're a pair of Azure and Microsoft 365 focused IT security professionals. It's episode 2 of season 6. Alan and I recently had a discussion around Defender for APIs. In this episode, we explored the critical world of API security through the lens of Microsoft Defender for APIs. Join us as we discuss how this tool can safeguard your APIs in increasingly cloud-centric environments. We've noticed that a large number of you aren't subscribed. If you do enjoy our podcast, please do consider subscribing. It would mean a lot to us for you to show your support to the show. It's a really great episode, so let's dive in. Hey Alan, how are you this week?
Hey Sam, not doing too bad. How are you?
Yeah, really good, thank you. Really good. Officially back into the swing of things in 2025. So yeah, really good for the world to have woken up again, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. Everyone's woken up. There's lots of go. Christmas is done. I think the cut-off period for saying, did you have a good Christmas, Happy New Year is now gone. So everyone's just like, yeah, let's go.
I had a call kicking off a project this week, and you'll know this, Alan. We naturally asked the customer, when are you, thinking about kicking this off? And they replied, oh well, we're completely free. Like now, let's sort of go. Do you know what I mean? And typically in my world anyway, usually it's like, oh well, we've got all these other things to do that are really important. You know what I mean? So it was actually quite a nice thing for somebody to say, hey, we're back and we're ready to go, sort of thing, right? So I was a bit surprised by that answer, but excited at the same time because that's what we want to see.
Oh yeah, definitely. It's always great to have you be able to well, in our sort of profession, to crack on with supporting customers straight away where we can. Fully appreciate that they may be busy or have other sometimes either greater priorities or just not the time, not enough time to spare to get it going.
Yeah, no, definitely.
Cool. Okay, so what's this week's episode on then, Sam?
We are going to talk about Defender for APIs.
Ooh, nice.
Yeah, we're slowly working our way through the many, many products that are inside of the Defender for Cloud suite. So this week will be a continuation on of one of those.
I'm glad you said it the way you did then, actually, because I had not slightly off topic, but I had a session with Microsoft this week around Defender for Cloud. And they were saying it's not Defender for Cloud isn't a product; it's a portfolio of products.
Yeah.
So sweet. Yeah, absolutely makes sense. It's not, I've enabled Defender for Cloud. I'm using the portfolio of products there.
Yeah, because what I sometimes found is people would refer to Defender for Cloud like, oh, you're going to implement Defender for Cloud. And I was like, what the hell does that mean? You don't... Okay, and I think most people are talking about like CSPM when they're referring to like posture management. And I'm like, if somebody put on like a statement of work or whatnot, implement Defender for Cloud, I'm like, you do know there's like 10 different products. I don't know the exact number off the top of my head. I probably should. And some of those are quite scary, if that makes sense. So, because they're all the workload protections, I would say, are very different skill sets and technologies, right? So, some of the outputs from them, you really do need to know those workloads to get the most out of them, right? So, yeah, it's cool. Well, I'm glad Microsoft picked up on my collective, term for Defender for Cloud. I'll take that, but no, I'm only messing. But I'm glad they agree with that for sure.
Yeah. Okay. So let's get started then. So I think probably kind of as you just said, you need to know the products or the services that the defenders sit on. So I guess it's worth probably talking about, what are APIs and why do we need to protect them?
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, APIs, application programming interfaces. back in the day, were all you have I'll call it like local or internal APIs on your devices. So if an application that's running on Windows wants to communicate with the operating system, it will use an API. You may have heard of the term SDKs, software developer kits, which are collections of APIs. So that's I would call those like local APIs. Now, when we talk about APIs in sort of the cloud, web, and distributed system sense, we're talking about discrete systems communicating to each other, typically over some type of network connection. Okay, so when you access the Azure portal, you are accessing, let's go with hundreds of different API endpoints or APIs and API calls that you're doing to fetch data about various things. So you would have seen when you load like a list of devices in the Defender port or in Azure or resources, you might see a spinning like bar or a spinning icon in the middle whilst it's waiting to load sometimes. That is because it's going off to an API to fetch the information that you need. So if you're looking at a list of devices in Entra, your browser goes, hey Entra, I need the list of devices for Sam. Can you get those for me? And the servers that the API servers that run Entra will return back and say, hey, you're authenticated, you're authorized as well. Here's the information that you want. Show this list of devices to Sam. That's a very basic example. I wanted to use something that people would actively use on a day-to-day basis. But APIs are used behind the scenes. We have distributed systems now where you're a business and you've got many like line of business applications and they need to talk to each other. You will use APIs to do that. Typically, we use probably the most ubiquitous version of APIs in the web sense are REST APIs. I would probably say there are different protocols, but let's just talk about REST APIs today, just to keep it sort of as simple as possible. And that is just a scheme or a definition, a language, so to speak, of how you define and how you transfer data between each other. So if me and you talk REST, then we can talk together, essentially, and we can define how we communicate with that. But with that, the data that is being transmitted through these APIs is highly sensitive. Well, there's different levels of sensitivity. But typically, all data now has some level of sensitivity and value to it. So there is naturally, you are exposing data to external third parties for your API. So, my example of Entra sending me my device list. Entra, we'll call it Microsoft, wants to know that Sam is sitting at the computer. And Sam has got the correct authorization in place to do that. So APIs and API security is a rather large sort of discipline and topic because just like a website, you want to protect them and you want to make sure that they are functioning correctly as well.
Yeah, okay. So just to probably elaborate then, and just I think this is right, so yeah, shoot me down if not, but APIs are also used to probably, kind of like you said, standardize the communication between two systems. And I guess behind an API, there could be various services behind that then let's think about this, that either collects the data or actions what it's sent. The API's been sent, or collects the data to be sent to the requesting server service, that kind of thing, and that behind the API there could be, I don't know, a SQL database, there could be a logic app, a function app, a app service, a virtual machine with some code running a container, etc. And in effect, the API is allowing you to sort of normalize that stuff behind that could potentially chop and change, but you never know that in some form because the API is hopefully kept the same where it can, if that makes sense. Is that fair to say from that sort of side?
Yeah, definitely. And I think it can become even more complicated than that. That you could have multiple layers of APIs between you and your data source, let's say, right? But yeah, I suppose, the most simplistic interaction is, somebody makes a request to an API, then there's a database next to it, and they go, "Hey, here's the record that you need," and then send it back to them. But typically, larger systems are even more complicated than even that today. So I would say, yeah, layers of APIs is also what needs to be thought about in the back of
Yeah,
it.
and I guess then at the same time, when you're kind of talking about sort of sensitive information, the APIs then in effect have access to that various data sources. It might be to a SQL database with PII data in it, or like you said, just could be sensitive to the organization or to its customers, that kind of thing. So it's made, I suppose, simple to access. Makes it simple to access that data, but at the same time, it then potentially needs protecting.
Yeah, definitely, completely agree.
Okay, so Defender for APIs. Could you give us a run through of what it is, what it's got, and in effect, its features?
Okay, so I sort of quickly went over sort of authentication and authorization. That is typically handled at the developer level or by a layer in front of your APIs, maybe like an API management service. I think we did. Did we do an episode on API management? I think we did.
Yeah, we did.
Yeah.
I'll
Okay.
find it for you.
Okay. Cool. Just to shout out. So yeah. So you might have your API, and in front of it, you might have put an API management service. And that might give you things like a way to collate your APIs, maybe put authentication and protection in front of it. But API management really is more around, as the name suggests, management, I would say, more than anything else. Okay. Defender for APIs is really around applying a technology to your API inventory to give you different levels of security protection, detection, and also response coverage for APIs. So kind of imagine this like, you use Defender for Endpoint to protect an endpoint or a device. This is it's not the same type of technology. It's a completely different type of technology, but the same type of principle, but for an API. And as I've mentioned before, these APIs are business critical endpoints for organizations. Imagine you're a bank and you're holding the financial information for one of your customers. Being able to send their bank balance to your proprietary mobile app is business critical information. It's highly sensitive information as well. So there are going to there is going to be a need and a desire to have as much protection on those types of endpoints, and it's usually driven by the criticality of or the sensitivity of the data, right? But we are now seeing so much regulation, and don't say that in a bad way, because as sort of security professionals, we sort of live and breathe this every day. I myself used to be a programmer, so I built APIs. I know what it's like on the other side. A lot of teams that build APIs are really focused on feature improvements. I'm not saying that they're not security aware or they're negligent in any way. But there's definitely the building and architecting of these systems, and also securing them and putting protection on them, as kind of can be two separate disciplines. A lot of development teams handle the security of their APIs as well. So if there are technologies that you can layer on top that can be beneficial to those teams, it can make them more efficient, get them back to doing the business value adds of feature development and architecture. Anyway, so let's talk about what can you do with it. So it does give you an inventory, a separate inventory of all the managed APIs that you're looking at, and as I said just before about the different disciplines in a large organization, it might be somebody else's role to manage and protect these API endpoints. So having a separate inventory is helpful from that perspective. When you apply it, you do get a number of security findings. So it analyzes the APIs. It gives you information about whether an API is used externally, whether APIs are unused potentially. Maybe they're redundant, they've not been used for a long time, and also any APIs that are unauthenticated. So this is quite a typical thing that we see in cloud resources, where maybe a configuration change has been made. I don't want to be hyperbolic and scaremongering, but these things do happen, we have seen these in the real world, where you build a secure API endpoint, you make a configuration change, and that API becomes unauthenticated for some reason. We see it with storage accounts, other different types of resources, on different cloud providers. But what I'm sort of getting at is the state in which you deployed something doesn't mean that in the life cycle of that resource that it's going to keep that same state. So having something, watching over is always a good thing. You and that forms a security posture, so that you sort of get to see all of those findings in one place, and it's easy to digest. It does add a layer of threat detection. So as API traffic is ingested, it will monitor for real-time threats as requests come into those APIs. And Microsoft makes a big statement about it covers items that are in the OWASP API top 10 critical threats. So that's a separate listing of sort of the top 10 sort of biggest vulnerabilities that OWASP are seeing, and they re-rank that. I think it's every year. But a common attack types such as SQL injection, cross-site request forgery, cross-site scripting, those types of attacks can be relatively trivial to detect. I say that lightly because what I mean is, when I say it's trivial to detect, maybe not from it being built, but these types of products are there today. And this threat detection is in real time. It is live. This is not a singular one and done review of the endpoints. This is running 24/7. It also integrates with Defender CSPM, which is a paid tier of Defender for Cloud, Cloud Security Posture Management, but it also integrates into the Cloud Security Graph, so that you can do graph. What do they call it? It's graph. It's blank in my mind now. I'll come back to that because I've got it in another section, so we will come back to that. But it does integrate into the wider CSPM offering from Defender for Cloud. It does integrate with Azure API management, so it's all together. It is all also together in one portal. So even if you have different people looking at it, it is all still in one cohesive space, essentially. And it does integrate with SIEM, so Sentinel, so that threat detection and logging can be pushed into your SIEM solution as well. You get a lot of rich information about when you see these security findings. You'll see the because APIs are made up of a bunch of endpoints. So what it will do is it will look at the API and it will drill down into each one of the endpoints for you, and it will show you the endpoints that are maybe have issues. So yeah, whether it's been used in the last 30 days, whether it's authenticated or unauthenticated, and whether external traffic has actually been transmitted to and from that. So with that quite clear information, you can really get a good visual representation of what's going on with each endpoint, because you could have hundreds or even thousands of endpoints. There is a reference list of the security alerts that you can get. So unlike other protection mechanisms, I'm just going to check this because I don't actually know if they've just 2 seconds. No, in that list. But okay, I'm going to call it out that not all of the detections that you see with security tools you get reference access to, because sometimes they're like black boxes. I think like spam detection, that type of thing. But there is a list of all of the different alerts that can be triggered from Defender for APIs. So I'll just the main reason why I'm calling this out is that you can actually see this before you purchase this to see if these are the types of detections that you feel you don't have today and are valuable to you. Because it is sometimes hard with some security tools to sort of prove the value of what you're going to see on the other side of it, if that makes sense, because you don't have a lot of raw information about it. So a suspicious a population level spike in API traffic to an API endpoint. So this is looking at a correlation between historical traffic patterns between specific APIs, IP addresses, and to that specific endpoint, looking at like flooding, distributed denial of service, that type of attack vector. Unusually large request bodies. So this is quite an important one for APIs, is when you're building an API, you have to tell your web server or your API how much data somebody can transmit to that API. Because if you can imagine, if somebody, let's say an endpoint that you uploaded like a profile image for a social media app, what would happen if you uploaded a 2 gigabyte profile image? You could potentially flood and exhaust server side information. Now that's a very simplistic example, but you can look at those maximum sizes and also look at historical traffic patterns from the last 30 days to look at anomalies of payloads being uploaded. So that can be very helpful for you to, well, one, whether you've got the correct limitations in place, and two, whether users are using your system in the right way. Previously unseen parameter used in an API call. So if you use specific these are parameters, so URL parameters or API headers as an example. If your application that you've built uses the same ones over and over again, if somebody's doing reconnaissance on your APIs, they might try to use different combinations of, say, URL parameters to try and enumerate what they can actually do. So those types of traffic patterns, and a lot of these are look at patterns of usage over 30-day periods. So it's not exactly like it's like, oh whoa, somebody just randomly sent like a random header one day. It's like, no, actually over the last 30 days we only see that parameter being used 10 times, and today it's been used 1,000 times. That might need to be looked at. So there is a reference list of the security alerts. So that is worth checking out in on the documentation. The Cloud Security Graph, the Graph Explorer. I just circling back to that because I couldn't remember the name of it, which is absolutely terrible. I do apologize. But it does integrate all of the information back to the Cloud Security Explorer, so you can use it to filter, to say, you could create a search in the Cloud Security Explorer looking at, show me all of the API endpoints that are exposed to the internet that are unauthenticated. So if you are a team that is utilizing the Defender for Cloud portal for a lot of these insights across your organization, you can build template searches there. You don't have to go drill down into the actual product itself. I do just quickly want to talk about... actually, no. I won't talk about anything more for the moment. I do actually just want to talk about sensitive data exposure quickly, actually, because this is quite a big... I'll call it big thing at the moment. Okay. Sensitive data exposure. We've had big regulation change with data protection, classification, and management. I think it's fair to say, Alan, DLP is like a thing now. It's always been a thing, but I think it's a thing now. Does that make sense? Yeah, like
yes, it's required now.
It's
in
required
most cases,
now.
yes, rather than being something you should. It's not a should.
Correct.
Could. It's now a must.
Yes,
Almost.
agreed. So what this can essentially do is it can monitor the data that goes through your APIs and actually allow you to filter that data based on sensitive information types, and you can even create custom classification information types. So where you would say you might label content in a SQL database, that is quite I would say an advanced labeling. If you're an organization that is applying a labeling taxonomy to structured data in SQL databases and things like that, congratulations, you are doing really well. But as that data leaves those systems, and we call that data lineage, as that data leaves that system and flows through other systems, it can end up getting, the external point of that can be these API endpoints. So you can apply data classification to these to these endpoints. And what that really can do is then, if you do have a security alert, you get that rich sensitivity context, and you can say, hey, the sensitive information that's used on this endpoint is like credit card numbers. So actually, the sensitivity of this endpoint is even higher than potentially others that are in your collection of endpoints. So I think that's a really great addition to it as well, and that sensitivity does link back to the Cloud Security Explorer as well for attack path analysis when you're actually seeing the sensitive information that is potentially being exposed there when maybe it shouldn't because of a security misconfiguration.
Yeah, okay. So yeah, it's definitely a lot there. Let's just, if I say quickly, try and recap that in a few sentences. It's going to be difficult. So collecting inventory of your managed APIs, finding security findings, analyzing them, understanding how they're used and whether they're unauthenticated. In effect, integration, cloud security posture management, security posture of those APIs, and with recommendations to to meet best practice, or to make sure that you're reducing the risk of attack for the kind of, as I say, obvious methods there. Being able to classify the data, or at least the APIs, based on the data that Defender API is seeing going through those APIs, so it gives you more, enriches the context of an incident, etc., or a threat against that API, so understand what type of data is going through it. And then you've got, in effect, threat detection, so identifying, like you said, the top 10 OWASP APIs, attacks, understanding those and identifying when they are being attempted, at least, or being executed on those APIs. Is that fair to say? And also, integration with seams, so that you can then use those seams to then create a response from an incident. That quick, short.
Exactly. Yep, 100%. You got it.
Cool. Okay, got that right. Win for me. Okay, so I mean, this kind of hearing that information, it kind of, to me, seems obvious that you should do that, to have that information. I mean, but that's the context of, I suppose, me being in the security world, this environment. So I guess, why would organizations that maybe are not thinking around, in this security space directly, why would they implement Defender for APIs?
Yeah, and I think it really comes back to the not want but need now that we have for real protections and real-time threats security solutions for every part of our infrastructure, right? Endpoint security, antivirus, EDR, quite staples nowadays. Modern management techniques, APIs, because they're not forward-facing to a lot of people, they kind of get forgotten about in some respects. So maybe the more popular ones in your organization that are actually sending data, to your users, potentially, because they are maybe public facing. They're exposed to we'll call it exposed to the internet, still authenticated and authorized, but there are tons, if not thousands, of internal APIs that need to be thought about as well. So the fact that there is a plug-and-play solution to that you can just purchase and you do not have to build as a PaaS offering is a massive benefit to organizations, because the cost and effort that is required to build these types of systems into your APIs, like, you can do a lot of hardening of APIs with your APIs and your web servers and what you're running off of there. But if we're talking about real-time threat detection, so measuring payload sizes over a 30-day rolling period and then tracking about whether they've deviated from their norms, that isn't something that you particularly want your development team building, right? So you either think about it like, that isn't a risk to me and I don't need to protect against it, or I'm going to buy a solution to do that, right? And that's where Defender for APIs does come in. And we see so much now of these attack vectors with threat actors. They will utilize these common techniques to probe, run reconnaissance on companies' infrastructure, we'll call it public infrastructure, to look for an attack path into those data stores, if that makes sense. And I think if organizations do have especially highly sensitive information, and now we are seeing that countries, governments, regulatory bodies are now classifying people's personal information as highly sensitive. Organizations now have a duty to protect these APIs as much as they possibly can. So Is it an insurance policy? No. But are you going to get extra threat detection and security posture awareness from this product? Yes. Um, and in some people in organizations, it's their role and their duty and their responsibility to minimize risk as much as possible. And a system like Defender for APIs is going to help them achieve that.
Yeah, and it kind of always comes down to at least the first stage of it. I mean, it's that discovery, isn't it? Understanding actually where your data or your exposed points of entry are, because I suppose it can be quite difficult to actually see that, even though you've got if you're in Azure and your API manager, you don't know how many endpoints on that API manager or APIs are on there and what they're doing, if that makes sense, or what they're accessing per se.
Yep. Yeah, exactly.
So
Yeah.
being able to see all that at least in a list, or being able to just literally just identify them, just gives you more context, as always, as we all.
Like,
Because it's,
if you're an organization, would you want to be notified of every single public unauthenticated API that is published into Azure? Like, I would want to know that, from a posture management perspective. We build this new feature, we forget authentication on one of the API endpoints. That does happen. That's not some malicious insider threat. That's not negligence. That's just potentially a mistake, a gap in QA, as an example. So having that visibility is, I think, really important.
yeah, it's that, but it's also I'm trying to think of a reason why you wouldn't authenticate an API. Maybe there's an API that you don't need to. Maybe it doesn't access the sensitive data, but it's needed to pull an image or pull content maybe for a site. Maybe it doesn't need to be authenticated, as an example.
But think about it like this, right? A login API call where you provide your username and password. We'll forget about passwordless exists just for the moment, right? A username and password API endpoint. Hopefully you're using some third-party identity management system. But anyway, let's just say that your application runs its own identity system, okay? Your login, your forgot password call, as an example, will need to be unauthenticated. So it doesn't necessarily mean that every unauthenticated publicly exposed API is bad, but you do also want to work out if those APIs are being abused. So that's why just the context of whether it is authenticated or not isn't enough, really.
No, and what kind of where I was going with it was that even if you do have legitimate unauthenticated APIs, at least from a business perspective, you can sign off the risk or identify why it's unauthenticated. Get that context, get it written down in a risk register, or like you said, you've got context about if it's being abused or not, kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. And when you see things like PaaS or low code systems, like your logic apps, things like that. We've had this before where you might use a logic app internally, but actually it's publicly accessible to the internet. Maybe you haven't, maybe it's just an intermediary step for two other systems to communicate to, or whatever it is, right? Those are the types of scenarios where it trips up organizations, because like I said, the quotes popular ones, your front end for your SaaS app or something like that, but your behind the scenes logic app could have as much, could pull and push as much sensitive information as anything else. If it's not set up correctly or have something in front of it, then you need to know about that.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so we've talked about what it does and why you'd want to do it and what an API is. I guess I think you kind of alluded to this a little bit, but how do you implement it? Is it hours of work?
So what you first need to do is you need to learn. No, you don't need to really do anything. Well, I say you don't really need to do anything. It is very simple as long as you've got your prerequisites in place. Not every cloud region is supported, so all the main ones are. So for our UK listeners, both UK South and UK West are, as an example. But do check to make sure that, it's in the location that you are running in. You do need Azure API management in front of your APIs as your inventory layer in order to enable it. So you do have an interconnected dependency with another. Sorry, what was our episode, Alan? Did you go back and get the?
It's in the notes. It is episode 15 in season 3.
Okay. Wow. Okay.
Yeah,
We
some
might have to
time
do
ago.
it. But so yeah, you use API management to inventory your APIs. You can store, you can host your APIs in other areas, and then have your clients interact through API management as sort of like a proxy, essentially. Defender for APIs doesn't currently work for APIs that are using self-hosted gateways or managed using API management workspaces. Just a heads up. And it can only analyze today REST APIs. So there are other API types that can be used within API management. It only is functional on REST APIs, which is a vast amount of APIs that are created today, especially sort of public-facing ones. As I mentioned, you do need to have Defender CSPM enabled in order to use that API security risks through the Cloud Security Explorer. So if you want to do that, then you obviously need that as well. You need to have at least one API management instance in the Azure subscription to enable it at the level of a subscription. You do need various permissions as well. The other one that I wanted to just talk about is you cannot use it with, let me just double check this, with consumption tier API management instances. So that is quite a cost jump because of that. So you need a non-consumption based API management tier, which there is a new there are new SKUs there. So I'm not sure about the mapping of what's prod. I was going to say you shouldn't be using anything, but you shouldn't be using consumption for prod. But I think there is a serverless prod environment now for API management. So, but yes.
I was going to say it's probably because you haven't got your own instance of it, have you? So it doesn't know specifically maybe IPs, things like that.
Yeah,
a consumption-based one. It's like
yeah,
free will, DNS-based, isn't it? Really, in effect, then.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, how do you enable it? You go into Defender for Cloud environment settings, and you toggle it on, essentially like you would any other workload protection. You do have to pick a plan, but I'll talk about that afterwards when we talk about costs. And then you enable it, and you select which APIs that you want to onboard, and you will see the APIs as they're in API management, and they'll be shown in the portal. Then if you look at workload protections, it's like what's the best way? It's like a dashboard inside of Defender Cloud. You should start to see those Defender API numbers increase. And then once you've done that, you can obviously look through, go via the workload protections in Defender for Cloud to see your API security dashboard. So to see all the different endpoints, what their posture is, the resource health for them. So you'll see warnings or recommendations like API endpoints in Azure API management should be authenticated, as an example. But as we've spoken about, it can be legitimate that some API endpoints should be unauthenticated. And things like the ones that are unused, you'll get a recommendation for that as well. There are remediation workflow automations. There is a GitHub repository for those, so you can do things like disable unused endpoints. You can do APIs should use encrypted protocols, so it'll force specific encryption protocols to be used on your endpoints. Those types of things. So there is actually a Git repository with each one in them. And then and then once you start to get that information, you'll get those alerts in Defender for Cloud. You can bubble them to where you need to as well, it's really then just to go through those findings, those recommendations, use the Cloud Security Explorer to see, to use that as a tool to query against them. Oh, there are also two template queries in the Cloud Security Explorer. One for internet exposed API endpoints with sensitive data, so that's quite good. And then APIs communicating over unencrypted protocols with unauthenticated API endpoints. So some organizations have regulatory requirements that require all communication to be encrypted. This can give you that type of information as well to make sure that you're compliant to those types of requirements.
Okay. So is it fair to say then with the implementation, is it actually onboarding into Defender for API, enabling it stuff is relatively simple to get that done? That actually the most work for the actual implementation really is around operational tasks and actually using it. So you've got the bit around looking at the recommendations and remediations, and checking as services are built to make sure that they do comply, or as Microsoft change the recommendations or enhance them, etc. You're checking, in effect, checking the posture as a process, a business process, and then as well as then looking at the side of it from the threats side of things, making sure that's then being looked at by your SOC, your security team, your managed service kind of thing, and that's being the other part to it. Because you're right, you can turn it all on, but if you don't do anything with it, or you look at it, day one, do some fixing, and then you forget about it, then you're not getting the benefits, are you, of making sure you're always, it's always secure or close to your posture being as good as it can be, kind of thing.
Yeah, you've got to think about the impact that it's going to have on your security operations, protocols and procedures and policies, right? If you're using Defender for Cloud today, a lot of these recommendations and alerts are going to bubble into the same places that you're used to, if that makes sense. It is going to add extra load into your security ops team. That might be the same as your admin team, but there is extra scope that they're going to have visibility of. Okay, and we sometimes have pushback from organizations because when you enable these tools, you can get a lot of findings that you didn't know. You were naive and unaware of these challenges inside your organization. And that can be that can be a challenge, for some organizations. So yes, it is real time. It's not one off. It isn't just CSPM. You are going to get actual actionable intelligence and alerts out of the system in real time.
Yeah. Okay.
One thing I did miss out is just the difference between web application firewalls and Defender for API, because there is a bit of crossover there. Now, web application firewalls, the guidance from Microsoft is they are more tuned for applications, not APIs. Okay, so they do have a level of protection on them, which does apply to API endpoints, but the detections for APIs are more tuned and specific to actually APIs with Defender for APIs. So it's Microsoft's recommendation that Defender for APIs is used. Now, if you're a company that's currently using WAFs and the cost of API management and Defender for APIs is too much to stomach and tackle, I think you're going to have to do a comparison between the detections that are used on both sides and whether you're really getting adequate coverage from your WAFs.
Yeah, funny enough, I was going to ask about that, and you might not didn't beat me to it. I was going to leave it.
I know. I had a big capital letters in my notes going talk about WAFs because it was it was like my first. I was like, we've already got something to do this, haven't we? Basically. So yeah, they're different, even though they're intermixed. And you can run, on app service, you can run APIs, right? So there is a bit of intermingling of technology stacks, PaaS offerings, and it's all a bit insular, should I say? But yeah, Defender for APIs is the way that Microsoft is pushing people.
Yeah, I mean, Defender for API has been out for, I'm going to say, just over 12 months, I think it is. It went GA or publicly announced kind of thing. Not 2024's Ignite, it was 2023's. So, yeah, they've definitely made enhancements since they came out as well. So it's definitely a key area for Microsoft to improve.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Okay. How much did it cost? How much? Yeah. How much did it cost for the SKU or the solution within Defender for Cloud?
Yeah, I'm just actually getting the pricing up for API management because, like, it's a needed prerequisite, isn't it? And it's changed recently, so I'm just gonna get us back to that, basically. Okay. So, right. So, you've got Defender for Cloud CSPM if you want the integration of Cloud Security Explorer. That's $5 per month per resource. Is that right,
So,
Alan?
Okay, so I've got some context here because again, this came from Tuesday. When I was was it Tuesday? Yeah, when I was Tuesday up at Microsoft. So, Defender CSPM is licensed for VMs, storage counts, and SQL in that subscription. It's not done on how many Defender or APIs you have. So the CSPM part, as long as you've got Defender CSPM enabled on that subscription, all APIs can be included. It's just the other resources are the ones that are classed as billable resources.
Okay, great. So if I had a subscription that had an app service in it, an API management, and nothing else, I would enable Defender for CSPM on it, and it would cost me nothing to run?
I believe so, yes.
Okay.
I don't know if you need one billable resource or not. That's a good point. I don't know that.
Okay.
But even if you just had one VM in there and you had 100 APIs, you'd only get paid for the one VM.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, but it's not app service, is it? So if you built your app service, your API on app service, you wouldn't be charged for that.
No.
In theory. Okay, fine. But let's just give the caveat that you have to have Defender CSPM on. So just be cautious of, not cautious, but be aware of the $5 per month per
Billable works, yeah,
workload. Workload, yeah. Okay. API management pricing has changed. We had classic tiers of pricing, which did include consumption. But again, consumption was, I believe consumption was really around like lightweight testing, non-production use, basically. The guidance from Microsoft was always to go to the basic tier previously for entry-level production use cases, which was $150 a month. Now with the V2, basic is shifted up slightly to $150 a month, and then it goes up standard V2, $700 a month, premium V2, $2,800 a month. We won't get into all of the nitty-gritty of those, but all I'm calling out there is it seems to me like the serverless, or the consumption-based API management tier is gone with the new V2 tiers. I assume you can still get classic pricing, but anyway. So you're looking at a minimum of $150 a month, really, for your team to get access to API management today or going forward. And you are charged for the amount of API requests that you put through API management. You get 10 million API requests per month on the basic version, and then you pay $3 per 1 million additional API requests. So, but if you go up to that premium, you get unlimited API requests. Anyway, so that self-hosted gateway is no longer supported in V2 tiers. Anyway, so that's all your prereqs. Sorry, Alan, you got anything you want to add there?
No, I was just going to say that's the reasoning then, isn't it? That if you can't get those other, if the V2s are the ones that are going to be going forward for API Manager, and that's why Defender for API doesn't support the other ones, because they're not going to exist in the future, I guess.
Yeah, that would be my assumption. So Defender for APIs, it has multiple plans. So plan 1, plan 2, plan 3, plan 4, plan 5. In our world, different numbered plans mean different functionality, but that's not what it means here. So plan 1 is $200 per subscription per month, and that gives you up to 1 million API calls. So just to rejig your memory, on that new basic V2 API management tier, you got 10 million API calls included. So only your first million API calls are covered in that plan 1. Plan 2 jumps you up to $700 per subscription per month and gives you 5 million API calls. Then it's a very big jump to plan 3. It goes up to $5,000 per month, and that gives you 50 million API calls. Plan 4 is 100 million API calls at $7,000 a month. So, double the amount of API calls for less than double the cost. And then, if you go over 100 million API calls, it's $50,000 per subscription per month for 1 billion API calls. So your API calls are sort of aggregated up at the subscription level to make things, I'm guessing, easier for billing, right? Because you'd be like, oh, I need a plan for this API and a plan for this endpoint. It would be mental, wouldn't it? But what I will say is, a starting cost of $200 per subscription is unfortunately going to it's not a substantial cost. I wouldn't say in the enterprise, but for smaller startups, things like that. But the only thing I will say is you are getting, a workload threat protection at that cost. It's not just CSPM. It's actually analyzing all of those up to 1 million API calls for $200 a month.
One thing as well to add to this, and again, this is new intel for me, is that with Defender for Cloud, you can get a trial, 30-day trial for it. What I believed it to be was that it was a trial for the whole portfolio. Here we go. I'm using the words portfolio kind of thing. But actually, if you've never turned on one of the workloads, since that subscription, when you turn it on, you do get a 30-day trial per workload.
Okay, nice.
Which I didn't know about. I thought it was you turn it on once and then that's it. You've burnt your like you said, the Defender for Cloud trial.
Yeah,
but it's not. It's now apparently recently changed to each one. There is a way to work out if you've already burnt or used your trial on that workload. There was a mention about that, which I'm going to try and find out. But yeah, in effect, if you've never turned it on, you may have never done because it's been new. Like I said, 12, 18 months. you want to try it out, you can just turn that workload on and trial it
Okay.
for 30 days.
It is worth noting that those limits per plan of API calls is not a hard limit. There are overage charges that can apply. Okay. So, like on plan, I'm not going to go through each one, but on plan 1, the first one, per API call, the overage cost is $0.0002 per API call, which I think is actually quite expensive, even though I said it was a lot of zeros. So you're going to want to make sure that you're on the right plan. But there is going to be a tipping point, isn't there, of when you move to that next plan versus the overage. I haven't worked that calculation out, but...
Yeah, that's true. Cool. Okay. Is there anything else, Sam? I mean, we're at an hour now.
Oh, my days. I apologise to everyone. No, I think, if you are looking for like a application firewall type product, and you are utilizing or planning to utilize Azure API management, this is definitely a product that you should potentially consider. I do think the hard requirement to API management is a little bit hard to swallow, because not all developers are utilizing that service. That's another service that you've got to add on. But I don't think we can deny the coverage of the workload itself. It's pretty comprehensive, I would say.
Yeah, and it's probably fair to say actually as well that there is a reservation now for Defender for Cloud workloads over generally, that any the amount spent there can be reduced if you pay up front. So maybe if you've got other workloads, this puts you over a tipping point to get a 10% saving, or up to 22%, I think it is, if you pay up front. So that's also worth mentioning as well, to maybe help with that cost if you know you're going to use it.
Yeah, exactly. And, for a real-time, workload like this, the engineering time alone to build some of these types of detections into your own system would dwarf $200 a month just in brain power and maintenance, and potentially even hosting. So actually, as a, enable it and get value from it immediately, can be turned on and off as well, so it's not exactly like you're locked into it for a long period, is it? It's not like an enterprise piece of software that you've just acquired. It's $200 per subscription per month. I'm not going to tell you to turn it off because of the ongoing insights and, and alerts. But if you do want to try it out and you want to get those posture benefits as well and recommendations, then you can certainly try it out with like you say, the free trial and even the $200 commitment for the first month.
Yeah. Cool. Previous episodes you said season 3, episode 15, the Azure API Manager. Kind of feels like we need a refresh of that one from the sound of it.
Yeah, there's quite a lot. There's quite a lot of change in it. Cool, Alan. What's our next episode?
So I was going to do something else, but I've been inspired by your sort of feel of...
By me, Alan?
Inspired
by me?
Yeah, by the Defender for Cloud
sort
of bit. No, from the conversations you've had. But I think it's probably worth revisiting Defender CSPM again to highlight what's in it and what's kind of there, because there's been some enhancements, especially I think since the last time we did it, or I did it, about what's included, what's the data you actually get, not just generally around it, because I think it's fair to say that a lot of it is believed to be, like I said, you have to pay a resource is paid, like the APIs, they're not included in the cost kind of thing, it's included in the general service. There's a few others like that I think we need to probably highlight to show the value of it as well. So
yeah,
I think that'd be a good episode to run through and refresh. Cool. So, did you enjoy this episode? If so, please do consider leaving us a review on Apple, Spotify, or YouTube. This really helps us to reach more people like yourselves. If you have any specific feedback on this episode or any of our other episodes, or you have suggestions for some of our future episodes, we have a link in our show notes to get in contact with us.
Yeah, and if you've made it this far, I apologise for 65 minutes of Defender for APIs. Thanks ever so much for listening, and we'll catch you on the next one.
Yeah, thanks all.